expanse of human governance, he proposed a new way of measuring time, and this is called the Julian calendar. Its intent was to link the counting of days to the fixed motion of the sun, and it eliminated a system that fudged a lot of numbers, and they had to put up with a lot of inconveniences. And he basically came in and well, actually, during his reign, there was an overlap of where all the fudged numbers kind of just fell into place with each other, and they called it the Age of Confusion. And so he said, screw this. We can do this better. We're smart enough. So he came up with the Julian calendar. So this is a practical reform of governance that is worth noting as a way of ordering life for a community. And so one of the things that stands out to me most in this chapter on the language of faith and the rise of Christianity and Buddhism is the mention of Dionysius Exiguus, who was, quote, a little-known 6th century abbot, and he drew a figurative line in the sand to mark the passage of time and the occurrence of history. There are things that happened before Jesus Christ, and there are things that happened after. While there are several reasonable conversations around the usage of BC and Anno Domini in the year of our Lord, AD, it is kind of gobsmackingly bold to claim an event so impactful on the world in this way. So in the cracks that emerged from the slow decline and breaking up of the Roman Empire, Christianity sprouted up, germinating in secret while it was outlawed for over 300 years. And it developed a language of secrecy as the stories of the miraculous life of Jesus Christ were passed from hidden community to hidden community. Symbols developed that created a code. Crosses, fish, words that said one thing and meant another, like pax or ichthus. Those were all this codex that helped people communicate about this thing that was that was just kind of getting steam through black kind of black market back alley channels. Then after the Roman Empire really broke up and moved east, Christianity took up, so when the Roman Empire went from Rome to Constantinople, or Istanbul when Constantine took it there, what was left in Rome was a huge infrastructure. And so all these Roman Christians, who also, now it was legal to be Christian, they used the foundations of that empire to start building its own empire. But they continued on with the culture of symbol because not only was it a feature of necessity, but the faith had found its appropriate form in that language. You see, the content of belief in the Christian doctrine was one of the first that really aimed beyond the material world in the real divine realm. So not just, if we think about, and Hinduism is an exception here, so we're really talking about the West and how it developed. But, if we remember, the Roman and the Greek gods were human analogs. And so this wasn't simply this idea of a high mountain that humans can't really get to, or a symbolic place. This speaks of real divine persons, not powerful analogs of weak human beings. Everything about Christianity aimed beyond the rationality of the classical mind, but it also didn't discard it. It tried to weave the two together. And so it is extremely appropriate that symbolism, using concrete images and accessible signs to capture and communicate entirely abstract and largely unique concepts about the state of humanity, that was what the symbols were for. And so part of how we understand this new chapter of kind of a language of faith is in the art that used this symbolic language. The art that emerged during the early Christian era has this sense of urgency. Let's pack as much information into the frame or image as possible. So on page 204 of your book, the sarcophagus is a really good example. The Murano book cover is another good example. No one symbol is enough to convey the scale of faith and its import. all the stories of Jesus's miraculous life had a place in almost every painting. Let's put his birth, let's put his baptism, let's put all of the things, and just try to pack as much content into each frame. So no matter what the central subject was, you found tons of stuff in the background that just held every aspect of the story. So this has continued on in the iconography that followed these early depictions. And then when it came to architecture, it continued even more, because now they had bigger space and they could actually fill up every corner, nook, and cranny with a symbol, an artwork, a saint here, commemorations to early Christian heroes and heroines. And so the architecture itself even became symbolic, right? The high columns that made you look up, the fact that it was laid out in the shape of a cross. So that space was utilized for some aspect of divine imagery. And so the language itself, not even just in the images. This is what I'm getting at. The language is symbolic. So borrowing from analogies used by philosophers and other wisdom cultures. Christ is a shepherd. God is the true light, and the sun. Think about Plato and this analogy of the cave. You go higher and higher and higher until you look at the sun itself, not just what's on, right? For Christians, they were like, oh, now you're talking about God. And so part of this is passed down as tradition. The narratives of Jesus' life on earth were called the Gospels, and they're full of his teachings, and they're full of parables, metaphors, symbols. And the teacher that Jesus was laid out to be in those stories is a good teacher. He uses everyday artifacts and stories and common images to share his message. So common to both Buddhism and Christianity, influencing both cultures' development, was this tension, because there was a ban in both faith practices on, or at very least like an uneasiness with idolatry. Christ's message was to convey the supremacy of the one true God, who he also claimed to be, and to make it possible for people to worship God fully. Buddha's message was to clarify that the pathways to enlightenment came through the mastery of self and the mastery of desire. Both pointed outside of themselves as the end or the telos of human undertakings. So idolatry was unacceptable because there was a proper end, and if you deviated and you started worshiping with your actions or with just your devotion a different thing, then you're not aimed at God or at enlightenment, your true destiny. So do not worship something that can be found here on earth. It's not the thing that would deserve your highest human action. So the problem then is, okay, well, how do you spread the faith, right? How do you spread the thing that you think is true? How do you make the invisible visible when you can't make an image of it because you're worried that's going to create idolatry? You represent it, right? Representation. You take parts of it and put it into new packaging, and you use it to point to the thing you really mean. This is symbolism, right? You're making signs. You can't fully show it, because if you could, that would mean it's comprehensible by human standards. Therefore, it can't possibly be the Godhead, because the Godhead is beyond human standards. And so there's this idea of what's called the ineffable that comes into place. The thing that can't be uttered, that's the thing that we praise. And this is a real big step for humans. So symbol, that reaching for the divine with things that are not divine, using the visible to discover the invisible, becomes a central and defining function of human undertaking up until this day. And moreover, the background of that, the motivation for a rise in symbolism, the idea that there is a material and immaterial world, divine and earthly, all of that comes from the strength of Christian influence starting in its earliest years. And we'll see this duality emerge in other cultures, making it something close to a universal in terms of human experience, right? There are always different expressions, but what do we see time and time again, and really taking root in this expression of human undertaking is this understanding that, okay, there are two realms, and humans somehow occupy both. How that gets sorted out, that's been fought over for years. So next week we'll discuss the rise of the other major faith-based civilization that had tremendous influence during this 1,000-year period, and that's Islam. And so we'll look at how they tackle the same question, how it came to rise, how there's a real centralization of, like we said, that faith movement in this time period, and so it's interesting to notice the pattern across continents, across geographies, and recognize something's going on in this upspring of human expression. For your homework, actually, I just want you to read this chapter. This week, we will be doing a language of faith project, which will be posted by the end of the week, and then your response or quiz will be on Islam next week. So make sure you are up to date on your readings in the text, and then keep an eye out for that.